Now, I want to introduce Farish Noor. Farish Noor is, I met him a couple of years ago. I'm not sure if he remembers. Actually, I went with Pam I was doing photographing him for his magazine called Options, I think. I was your I was assistant. I helped Pam hold up his light reflectors. And went to his apartment somewhere in Ampang, KL. And I thought wow, who's this buddy? And then later I found out that he was a hotshot academic, has written a few books. At that time, I think he was already rising star, and now he's an absolute star. Last time we've been sort of hosting lectures, public lectures done by Farish at the NX Gallery where I work. And every time we do the lectures, we've had teams of lots of people come, and he usually wears his tight t-shirts when he does his lectures. It's just a bit of a turn on for a lot of us. Some of us are perplexed, I'm just supposed to be a serious academic, but Farish, I think is a serious academic, but he has taken a step beyond that line. It says you have to dress really boring to be a serious academic. But today he's very underdressed. Not typically. I think he's very shy. He's been going around Jakarta, Java doing field work. But writer, academic, political scientist, lectures at Nanyang here, and a good friend, Farish Noor.
If anything absurd comes out from my mouth, it's because I'm laboring on the alcohol, and as Noor has pointed out, I'm rather tired. I'm sorry about that. I was actually trying to do a number of things, but of course, the leitmotif which this discussion is taking place is what's going on in Malaysia next door, where I suppose you're all familiar with the 3 digits 377 by now. Some of you, especially Malaysians, would know what I'm referring to. Apparently there's 377 A, B and C. So many of us who are from Malaysia are now being given a daily lesson in constitutional law in Malaysia. And I'm actually a historian. I'm a political scientist and I'm a historian. I research many things. But one of the perks of being a historian is that you get to read texts that many of us have forgotten about. And in the course of doing sort of historical research work that I try to do many different things at the same time. I multitask. So I'm trying to work on a pre-modern, pre-Islamic geography of Southeast Asia at the moment. Which is one of the reasons why I'm in Java, I'm touring the temples. But I'm also attempting a sort of sexual geography of Southeast Asia, which is a rather sexy subject, I think. And I wanted to actually conflate two different presentations here, actually. The first one is actually the title that I think you may or may not... Was the title actually announced? Our very own bisexual superhero, a rereading of the Hikayat Panji Semarang. And I also wanted to add to that another paper that I'm actually writing for Amir Muhammad, which has a title that Amir is laboring with the censorship board in Malaysia at the moment. The title is Of Cocks and Pirates, Early European Encounters with the Indonesian-Malaysian Penis. I'll try to do both. But let's start with what I'm working on at the moment. I'm trying to put together material for what I hope would be eventually a sexual geography of Southeast Asia. What do I mean by that? I find it odd that today many of us have to live under conditions that are actually very, very new in the context of Southeast Asian history. Because those of you who are familiar with the pre-modern history of Southeast Asia will know that the history of sexual relations and sexual identities, gendered identities, was far more fluid in the pre-colonial period. So one of the things I've been doing is actually studying the temple architecture of Southeast Asia. And in Central Java, thanks to EasyJet, you can all now fly to Solo. No, you can't from Singapore, by the way. You have to go to Malaysia first, and then we taxi you, and then you fly to Solo. But fly to Solo and go to these slopes of Mount Napi and Mount Lawu, and check out the temples of Candi Chetto and Candi Suko. Candi Suko, which is one of the oldest temples of Central Java, dating back to the 8th to 10th centuries, has got some very interesting statuary around it, still intact, mind you, yeah. And what's interesting about the statues that you see at Candi Suko is that they demonstrate very clearly, to those of you who know your Hinduism by heart, that Tantric Shivaism was actually practiced in Central Java. And this is actually very, very important, because Candi Suko, till today, we don't actually know what this temple is all about, why it was constructed. We assume, we think that it was basically a place where, well, frankly, meeting rituals were carried out there. And this is sort of enhanced in a sort of pre-Viagra era by statues that sort of tell you what sort of positions you may or may not want to adopt while you are in the act of lovemaking. So the statue is actually very, very explicit. And unlike the more abstract representations of human genitalia that you get in the very abstracted lingams that you see, the ones at Candi Suko are actually very, very anatomically correct. So a bit large, in very close focus, but it is actually very interesting to actually visit this site, simply because also in the statues and in the depictions, the carvings that you see on the wall, we see the whole spectrum, the kaleidoscope of sexuality and sexual relations that were actually prevalent in Central Java at the time. So this is the point that I've actually been trying to make, because some of us, especially those of us who are activists in the LGBT scene in Malaysia, are basically trying to debunk all this nonsense about this whole case that we have in Malaysia at the moment about whether certain sexual practices are normal or abnormal. The point I'm trying to make is that much of this was actually normalized, was perfectly normal, and I'm sorry to say, even ordinary and mundane then by So while doing this, I've also been doing sort of archaeology of the text. So I'm not going to tell a story, I'm going to read a story about a story, I'm going to relate a story to you. And the text I want to look at is the Panji texts. Now, what are the Panji texts? How many of you are familiar with Panji, by the way? Can I see a show of hands? Nobody knows Panji. Well, one person knows Panji. Okay, the Panji texts are actually very, very interesting. They're interesting in the sense that, and this again, as a historian, is something very alarming for me, because I detect that so much of our history has been wiped out, systematically wiped out over the past millennia. But the Panji texts are actually very crucial. They originated in Java, and they sort of spread all the way up to mainland Southeast Asia. We see influences of the Panji stories in Thailand, in Khmer, in Lao culture. What's Panji? What is the Panji? Panji is a sort of everyman hero. He's a mythical character, and I will not bore you with all the long historical debates about who Panji was. There are actually a number of characters who assume the figure of Panji. And he is a hero who in many ways embodies the entire cosmology of Southeast Asia in the pre-modern Hindu-Buddhist period. Now, through the Panji tales, and so much of the Panji tales, for example, still resides with us today. We just don't realize it. If you look at any wedding ritual in Southeast Asia, the use of the dais, the dress of the wedding couple, all of that is actually derived from the Panji tales. Every known traditional batik design was originally inspired from the Panji stories. So much of Javanese and Southeast Asian court culture, including the egomaniacs we have as our leaders, also derives from the traditions of kingship and rulership that you get in the Panji texts. The Panji texts, in a sense, are the creation myth of Southeast Asia. And one possible account for the Panji text is that the Panji text was an attempt to explain the creation of the Southeast Asian moral and cosmological universe. And so the story of Panji normally involves two characters whose union is meant to symbolize the union of Vishnu and Ratu Devi.